The eyes the eyes of the world are on Paris and France. So how better than for us to contribute a series on what is probably, Dominic, one of the great seismic events, not just in European, but in global history.
It's certainly one of the 2 or 3 greatest stories in world history. I mean, the roller coaster of bloodshed, violence, utopianism, insurrection, excitement, you name it. So this is the kickoff for our first series, which will take us through the first couple of years of the revolution.
Yeah, so we're going to look at some of the causes, some of the background to the revolution, and then we'll take through the storming of the Bastille, and go up to the point where the king, Louis XVI, and his queen, Marie Antoinette, who we've just been hearing about, trying to get out of France. And spoiler alert, they fail. And that is the cliffhanger on which we will leave it.
Yeah.
Because, of course, everybody knows what will then happen to the king and queen.
Yes.
And I think Marie Antoinette is a kind of wonderful focus for looking at some of the causes, because she's very, very celebrated. I mean, one of the instantly kind of recognizable figures.
She must be one of the 2 or 3 most well-known people in all French history, I would have said.
Yes. And at the time, she is seen by enthusiasts for the revolution as the absolute embodiment of everything that prompted it. You know, she is the kind of the incarnation of ancien régime, arrogance, of aristocratic splendor, and of a kind of quality of vampirism that has leached the French people of what should be rightfully theirs.
Yeah.
And in her lifetime, before and then particularly after the revolution, she is the object of absolutely kind of obsessive hatred. And it's also a kind of prurient hatred. You know, because it is tied up with kind of fantasies about what she's been getting up to. And I guess that runs through to the present day, because the one phrase that everyone would associate with her, let them eat cake, is still repeated, isn't it? Despite the fact that she never said it.
I know. And the original phrase is qu'il mange de la brioche. So let them eat brioche. Has slightly different connotations, doesn't it? Yeah,
because I always kind of imagine them, you know, a big gatto, kind of strawberries on the top or something.
But she never said it anyway, so there's no point in dissecting it, I guess, to some degree, other than the fact that people think she said it is indicative of this idea of her and Louis, who's supposedly who's her puppet, but them living this life of unbelievable depravity and licentiousness and arrogance and not caring.
Yeah.
All of which, well, not all of which is completely wrong, but there are definitely huge problems with that.
Nuances there. But again, I mean, against that, against the image of Marie Antoinette as a kind of depraved vampire, there's also been, right from the beginning, for conservatives, a sense that she is the archetype of the victims of the revolution. Her fate exemplifies what critics of the revolution see as its destructiveness, as its kind of bloodlust. So the revolution itself is cast as a vampire. And in England, the person who classically first articulates that is the Irish politician and Whig, so not even a Tory, Edmund Burke, who November 1790 wrote Reflections on the Revolution in France. And in that, he famously recalls seeing Marie Antoinette kind of 16 or 17 years before at the court, glittering like the morning star, full of life and splendor and joy. And he famously enthuses, I thought 10,000 swords must have leaped from their scabbards to avenge even a look that threatened her with insult. But the age of chivalry is gone, that of sophistas, economists and calculators has succeeded, and the glory of Europe is extinguished forever.
I would say his is among biographers and among people who studied the revolution, it's his take actually that is more enduring than the let them eat cake, she's a vampire school of thought, isn't it? Because actually now I would say most writers are filled with horror when they look at what happened to Marie Antoinette, this young girl who arrived in France and was turned into a hate figure for the mob. Don't you think?
Chantal Thomas, who we opened with, I mean, her book is about the vituperation that is kind of lashed on Marie Antoinette. And she has a section where she talks about how biographers through the 19th and into the 20th century would debate about whether these were true or not. And she just says, none of these stories about the incest and the vampirism are true. I mean, they're obviously not true. And she says that most recent biographies have been written, and to quote her, with sympathy, if not with love. And I would say that's probably true of her as well, because she wrote a novel that then got turned into a film called Farewell, My Queen in English, that featured Diane Kruger, so Helen of Troy in Troy, as Marie Antoinette. And that's a French film. But of course, Marie Antoinette has also been a kind of an American pin-up. So a film that was massively popular with my daughters when they were growing up, came out in 2006, is Sofia Coppola's Marie Antoinette, in which she's kind of cast as, very much a contemporary heroine. She's surrounded by her squad.
Yeah.
She's got Converse trainers in the cabinet. She rushes around Versailles to new wave bands. And what was interesting about that, I was kind of reading up about the reception of it in France, because it was premiered at Cannes. And there it was greeted with boos and then with cheers. So kind of answering boos and cheers by the French journalists who've been watching it, which I guess kind of sums up a massive division in France itself.
Because Marie Antoinette
about her
stands for the revolution to some degree. Because what you think of Marie Antoinette, you ask a French, an educated Frenchman or Frenchwoman what they think of Marie Antoinette, and their answer will tell you what they think of the revolution, probably, and probably also where they stand politically even today in the 21st century, don't you think?
Yeah, I do. And I think to a degree that may be true as well in the broader world, perhaps. But I mean, it's much more focused in France, obviously. And I think that sense of ambivalence, is Marie Antoinette a monster, or is she a victim? Is she someone to be detested and loathed, or is she someone to be pitied and admired? That's an ambivalence that is there even before the revolution. So what is the way that she is viewed by the French public is a kind of mixture of loathing and desire.
Because she's not always hated. That's an important point to make.
She's not. And there are certain, she's very popular with certain segments of society. And I think that she's cast either as a kind of emblem of royal grace, because she's, as we will see, in a way, she's a very, very modern figure.
Yeah, completely.
She kind of basically, I think, invents the French ideal of fashion. She's way ahead of the game. But to other people, this makes her the kind of the embodiment of frivolity or decadence.
Yeah.
She's a very proactive queen. Queens in France generally are not expected to play a proactive role in court life and national life, still less national life. Marie Antoinette comes to do that. And she's a kind of emblem of all the paradoxes that we'll be talking about in the context of the revolution. But the fact that she's a figure of fantasy is really crucial, because not just her, but the revolution itself is about the creation of stories, the projection of stories and narratives onto facts of, the economy, agriculture, the crowds, the court, everything. It's how you structure the story that basically determines your attitudes to the revolution, I think. Do you think that's...
Absolutely, I totally agree, Tom. I mean, historians like Simon Sharma and Robert Darnton have written brilliant books about how the French Revolution is it's a sort of hall of mirrors, or a hall of narratives, I suppose.
Well, very appropriate for Versailles.
For Versailles, exactly. So let's start not at Versailles, but with Marie Antoinette herself. So she is born, Tom, in 1755. And of course, the single most important thing about her, I would say, is that she is not French. She is Austrian. We love the Habsburgs on The Rest is History. I don't think there'll ever be a historical podcast in the history of mankind that is so keen on the Habsburgs as The Rest is History. We've had Edward Habsburg talking about the Habsburgs. We've had Franz Ferdinand, a great friend of The Rest is History. And now another Habsburg, Marie Antoinette.
Yes, although she's born Maria Antonia. And I think that it's fair to say that her identity as an Austrian and as a Habsburg is kind of fundamental both to how her admirers see her and how her detractors see her. So to her admirers, she is an embodiment of a new age of peace between what traditionally have been the great rivals in European politics.
Yeah.
So going right the way back to the 16th century, Charles V and Francois I. These are the people who are kind of tearing Europe up while Luther is busy getting on with his stuff. And France and the Habsburg Empire have been the great geopolitical rivals on the continent of Europe. But this has changed over the course of the 18th century due to the emergence of two new great powers.
Yeah.
One of those is Britain, very happy to say. So in the 7 Years' War, Britain is taking on France and winning as a kind of global power. But on the continent, there's the emergence of Prussia.
Yes.
And Prussia is hungry for a lot of Austria's traditional territories. And under its great king, Frederick II, it annexes a province called Silesia, doesn't it? Which is basically now, it's a chunk of Poland.
Yeah.
And the Habsburgs are terribly upset about this. And basically, they kind of enter into an alliance with France so that they can get Silesia back. And France enters into an alliance with Austria so that she can have a counterweight to Britain.
So the diplomatic revolution, historians call this, because it's such a seismic moment in European history.
Yeah, so the 7 Years' War breaks out in 1756 with Britain and Prussia against Austria and France. And the following year, a very heavyweight figure in French politics, the Duc de Choiseul, arrives in Vienna as the French ambassador. And the rulers who greet him, they're a couple, aren't they? So there's the emperor is Francis I, but the person who's really kind of cracking the whip is his wife, the Empress Maria Theresa.
Yeah.
And she is a very, very proficient politician. Indeed, one might say stateswoman. But she's also very, very fertile. And the Habsburgs have always, it's been their boast, isn't it, that some empires get their way by fighting, we do it by marrying off our children.
Yep.
And Maria Antonia is their 11th daughter, and as it will turn out, their last daughter. And the reason that the Duc de Choiseul is interested in her is that she is 1 year younger than the grandson of Louis XV, the French king, also inevitably called Louis. And his very fertile mind is thinking, well, we could maybe marry them off.
A brilliant way to cement the alliance and to ensure that the alliance endures.
Yes. And so in due course, Choiseul goes back from Vienna, he goes back to Paris, and he becomes the foreign minister, basically the kind of almost the prime minister for Louis XV. And he's kind of pushing this idea. He's saying, we should really try and cement this alliance. And it comes into further focus in 1765 when Louis XV's son, and therefore the father of this Louis, who is being lined up to marry Maria Antonia, he dies. And so the grandson of Louis XV is now the Dauphin, the kind of French equivalent of the Prince of Wales, the heir to the throne.
And he's 11. He's 11, and Maria Antonia is then what? Sorry, is she 10? 10, yeah.
On the 4th of April, 1770, it's all agreed. The marriage contract is signed. There's a kind of weird thing where they do a proxy marriage in Vienna. So the new emperor, Maria Theresa's son, Joseph, he stands in as for the Dauphin. And then 2 days later, Maria Antonia is put into a carriage along with 56 other carriages, and they set off from Vienna to go to France. And people who are enthusiasts for this alliance think this is brilliant. Absolutely wonderful.
But of course, in France, there are lots of people who are not enthusiasts because, as you said, these are ancestral enemies. They have, of course, come together under the pressure of Prussia and Britain. But culturally and imaginatively, the idea of Austria to most French men and women is as this horrendous place, our enemies. The Austrians can't be trusted. And that baggage, she is never able to shed it for the rest of her life.
So right the way through her career and kind of to an escalating degree, she is always referred to as l'Autrichienne, so the Austrian. But if you put the emphasis on chienne, that's bitch in France. So it's the kind of the ostrich bitch. So she's always being portrayed either as an ostrich or as a dog or both. And the weird thing is that this isn't actually remotely fair because her father is basically French. So Francis I, he's the Duke of Lorraine. He is of French royal descent. And there's a case for saying that Marie Antoinette is actually one of the most French queens that the Bourbon, the royal dynasty, have ever had, because normally they're marrying foreign queens who have no French connections at all. But what's interesting is that, her father basically gets written out of the story, and she is portrayed as being her mother's daughter, solely her mother's daughter. Maria Theresa is seen as this terrifying virago who is out to destroy France. And so Marie Antoinette is cast as a kind of Trojan horse who's been sent into the very stronghold of French power to destroy it from inside.
In Simon Schama's words, the spy whore, he calls it. He says that's the image that is, we're jumping ahead, but that's the image that people later have of her.
And Maria Antonia, who becomes, she really does become Marie Antoinette. So actually French has been her first language. She speaks it initially with a German accent, but that very rapidly, she very rapidly loses that. And in preparation for her life at the French court, she's had a French tutor called the Abbé de Vermont, who turns up and is appalled to discover that Marie Antoinette has basically she hasn't had any education at all. And throughout her life, she has no interest in books. She's incredibly kind of not remotely.
Although she is interested in kind of the cultural temperature, isn't she? She's, as we will see, she's very into kind of.
But I think she kind of absorbs it with. It's said of her that no one has ever seen her finish a book. And I think that is kind of widely believed. And he complains of a quality that will be repeatedly applied to her, which is her légèreté, her frivolity, her lightness, the fact that she is not a heavy person, I think it would be fair to say. But he also acknowledges that, she has great charm, she has great poise. She is also, she's not conventionally pretty, because she has the kind of, the classic protuberant lower lip of a Habsburg.
Yeah.
But she has, the Abbé says, a perfect porcelain complexion. She has brilliant blue eyes. She has a very sweet oval face. So basically, she will do.
Yeah,
She's
that's
fine.
the reports. Robert Darnton, in his book The Revolutionary Temper, says that when the pamphleteers, newspapers and whatnot, were talking about her in France, they all said she's actually very nice looking. She's blonde hair, beautiful pale complexion. Everyone is pleased. She looks like a queen.
She does, and as we will see, she becomes a great icon of beauty and fashion and style. And there's a kind of symbolic moment where she ceases to be Austrian and becomes French, which is she's traveling up from Vienna with her, in her 57 carriages, and on the 7th of May 1770 they reach the Rhine, and there's an island in the middle of it, and this wooden pavilion has been built that looks like a kind of a perfectly tiny chateau, and it has 5 rooms inside it, and there's kind of 2 on the Austrian side, 2 on the French side, and there's a kind of room in the middle. And Marie Antoinette goes into the Austrian rooms. She's divested of her clothes down to her kind of underwear. She's then put into a French ceremonial dress. She's led into the central drawing room. The door leading into the French rooms is opened. She looks back. The doors, the Austrian doors have been shut. All the Austrian servants have vanished. And Marie Antoinette is handed over to this terrifying woman who is the maîtresse d'étiquette, the woman who is going to instruct her in the ritual of the court, called the Comtesse de Noailles.
What was that noise?
Comtesse de Noailles.
Noailles. Yeah, it's just too many vowels. There's basically 4 vowels in that.
It's a Scrabble.
Yeah.
It is Scrabble heaven. And Marie Antoinette bursts into tears at the sight of this terrifying woman, flings herself into the Comtesse's arms. The Comtesse, massively embarrassed, very stiff, shrugs her off, performs a low curtsy. Marie Antoinette apologizes and says, "Pardon me, these are for the family and the fatherland I am leaving. For the future, I shall not forget that I am French." And the Comtesse de Noailles says, "Yeah, you better not. I'm here to whip you into shape." So off they go.
And Tom, just one thing.
Yeah.
She is 14 years old. She's not yet 15.
Yeah, she's
so,
tiny.
this is imagine what an unbelievably terrifying moment this must be for her.
And what makes it even worse, she has an adorable little dog who she has to leave behind. But we'll come to that later. It's a crucial part of the story. Anyway, on they rattle, and it takes them a week to meet with the Dauphin and the French king. And they do it outside the forest of Compiègne. The Dauphin and the Dauphine, as Marie Antoinette now is, are introduced. 3 days later, they are married, and she is now the Queen of France.
Just on the marriage, Tom, one bad omen, one very dark omen. If anyone knows about Russian history, they will spot the resemblance. Nicholas II Alexandra, when they were crowned, there was a massive stampede afterwards, and hundreds of people were killed. Well, after the marriage of the Dauphin and Marie Antoinette, there was another stampede. There's a fireworks display that goes horribly wrong. Perhaps 150 people were killed in the crush. And so after that, whenever people...
Doesn't a firework kind of drop onto a
exactly.
tent?
Exactly. There are they've got two rival fireworks designers, a man called Monsieur Torre and a guy called Ruggieri. And Ruggieri goes second, so he wants to outdo the other bloke. It's an incredibly elaborate fireworks display. It goes wrong. A firework falls onto this temple that is built, a temple of Hymen. And in the crush, 150 people are killed. And so whenever people remember, they look back later on, they say, doomed from the start. What a bad omen. We should never have got involved with this Austrian woman. The fireworks were a warning.
And this kind of great emblem, isn't there, kind of the arms of France and the arms of the Habsburgs.
Yeah.
Kind of intertwined. And the fact that it has generated this disaster, as you say, is seen as an omen. And I think that reflects the fact that the French don't only hate the Austrians, but kind of look down on them because Austria, relative to France, has been declining since the 16th century. And France now is, with the exception of Russia, it's by far the largest kind of European realm. So it's been in the 18th century, it's been described as the China of Europe. It has by far the largest population.
28 million. Twice as big as Britain.
And Britain, even with Ireland. And it has kind of geopolitical power. It has, population, as you said, and it has massive cultural prestige. And of course, the great symbol of this cultural prestige is the place where Marie Antoinette has gone and where she will spend much of her life, which is the enormous palace of Versailles. It's where they're married. This enormous palace, kind of 700 rooms, 2,000 windows. The roofs cover 100 hectares. I mean, on an enormous scale. And it's basically the physical embodiment of the style of government that the French monarchy represents, which is a kind of monarchical absolutism.
Yeah.
The French monarchy had always been powerful, but since the 16th and then through the 17th and definitely into the 18th century, it's become more and more, it's monopolized power more and more. And the figure who represents that is the great-grandfather of Louis XV and predecessor, Louis XIV, who had basically annihilated the nobility as an independent political class. He had required them to come to Versailles, and they are merely planets orbiting the sun.
Yeah, Sun King.
The Sun King. And so Versailles sets fashion, manners, dress, everything for the whole of Europe. So the great rival of Louis XIV, the Duke of Marlborough, when he celebrates his victories over the Louis XIV by building a kind of ersatz Versailles.
Yeah, Blenheim Palace.
The Blenheim Palace. For Marie Antoinette, and indeed pretty much for everybody, I mean, it's a very oppressive place, isn't it?
Oh, it's awful, because the court is... So she's grown up in the Habsburg court, which is much more informal and is becoming more informal during her childhood. But the French court is governed by... I mean, it's partly because it's governed by these very, very strict ceremonial hierarchical rules, but also it is a kind of snake pit of politics, isn't it, with people jostling for power the whole time.
Yes, and one of the problems for Marie Antoinette is that her patron, the Duc de Choiseul, falls from power only a few months after her marriage. And he'd been her sponsor, her protector, and that means that she's just a very young girl, teenager, and she's surrounded by people who hate her and hate Austria. So the aunts of the Dauphin, so Louis XV's daughters, they hate Austria. Also, the Dauphin has younger brothers, and one in particular, the Comte de Provence, who in due course, vastly in the future, and I use the word vastly advisedly, will become Louis XVIII. I mean, a man of colossal size. But at this point, he's just, he's still very young. He's just a teenager himself, but he's consumed with resentment of the fact that he's not going to be king. So he's a potential snake.
A younger brother who turns out to be a snake. Who could ever? That will never happen in monarchical history again, will it, Tom?
Never again. Yeah. There are certain parallels to contemporary royals that we'll be teasing out over the course of this series, I think. And poor Marie Antoinette feels completely cut off, and she complains that all her correspondence is being looked at, that nowhere that she locks anything is safe. And essentially this is the kind of treatment that all foreign queens in Versailles are put through. They are kind of there as hostages, as much as anything else. And, they're not expected to have a good time. They're not expected to enjoy themselves. But Marie Antoinette she's strong enough. And right from the beginning, it's clear that she is a much stronger character than her husband. And it's clear that she is, when she becomes queen, she is going to kick back against this kind of formality. So there's a kind of classic moment where, for some reason, she's riding on a donkey. It's the kind of thing, I guess, that a teenage girl might enjoy doing, but that the Comtesse de Noailles really disapproves of. So she falls off the donkey and she kind of makes this witty quip that she'd better send to the Comtesse to find out what the etiquette is for a Dauphine falling off a donkey. And you can see there that this is an attitude that is going to rub up against a lot that has made Versailles tick.
Yeah.
However, having said that she's resentful of the kind of the formality and the stiffness of it all, there is also the fact that Versailles, particularly under Louis the 15th, is a kind of it's a showcase for unsettling displays of royal libertinism, because Louis the 15th, although personally quite a kind of modest and shy person, I mean he's a bit of a dirty old man as well.
Tom, he only ever, from morning till night, he only ever thinks about one thing. Is it not true that the first thing he said when he was told about Marie Antoinette's existence, when he was...
It's when she's arrived.
Oh, right, when she's arrived.
And the first thing he says is, does she have large breasts?
I mean, that's bad
And he's
form.
disappointed to learn that she doesn't.
From your father-in-law, you don't want to hear it, do you?
No, and particularly because he's been a great man for mistresses. So he had a very celebrated mistress, Madame du Pompadour, but she's gone. And the new mistress, the Comtesse du Barry, who's been elevated to that title, she's a kind of former courtesan, and she has it's a kind of semi-formal title, the maîtresse en titre. But Marie Antoinette is appalled by this. She's been raised a devout Catholic. There's nothing like this in Vienna, and so she defies court protocol by refusing to even speak to the Comtesse du Barry. And Maria Theresa, her mother, is furious about this because she's trying to get France to back her in a kind of dispute over a chunk of Poland.
Yeah.
And she says, "Look, you've got to talk to to Madame du Barry. I need you to do this." So Marie Antoinette does eventually, and she says to Madame du Barry, "There are many people at Versailles today," and there's great cheering.
Hurrah! What a
say, hurrah!
Yeah. Finally. The dam is broken.
Yeah, she never says anything else.
Okay.
But fortunately for Marie Antoinette, neither Madame du Barry nor Louis XV are long for the world, because on the 27th of April, 1774, Louis XV falls ill. And gossip will say that he falls in an entirely predictable way, because Madame du Barry has supposedly sourced a young peasant girl for him. And the valet has brought this peasant girl in, and the peasant girl turns out to have had smallpox. And so his whole face ends up a great suppurating mass of pustules. A bronze mask enlarged by the crust.
Oh, my word, that's nice. So that thing that you just said there, gossip has it, or rumour has it, that's really, really important. Because this is an age where the court is kind of hermetically sealed off from Paris. And therefore from the rest of France. And so most people learn about the king and queen through rumour and gossip. And this is an age when there are pamphlets, people are swapping ballads, people are, it's a very literate, very news-friendly society in a way that has not really existed before.
And Dominic, what is more is that you say that Versailles is hermetically sealed. I mean, it kind of is in one way, but in another way it isn't, because all the different factions in Versailles are leaking stuff. So all the kind of the scandalous stories that are told about the Queen, and in due course about Marie Antoinette, these are not coming from disgruntled Republicans. They're coming from power players at the very heart of the court,
Yes.
often from the royal family itself.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the wellspring of all the gossip and slander that will overwhelm Marie Antoinette in the period of the Revolution has been established by Versailles itself. Anyway, so whether Louis XV is dying because he's been brought, a peasant girl by his mistress or not is up for grabs. But what is clear is that on the 10th of May, 1774, he dies. The news is brought to the Dauphin, and there's kind of amazing descriptions of how the sound of the news being brought to him and of people running to come and tell him is like a kind of swelling tidal wave. Power has left, the king is dead, long live the king. And the Dauphin is with Marie Antoinette. Of course, he's no longer the Dauphin, he's now Louis XVI. And there are various accounts of what they say when they're told the news, but the most celebrated one is that they fall to their knees and cry out, "May God guide and protect us, for we are too young to reign."
Because they were 18 and 19, something like that. Yeah.
And I think they're aware that France faces massive problems. But Marie Antoinette later writes to Maria Theresa, her mother, and says, "I cannot refrain from admiring the workings of Providence, which has chosen me, the youngest of your children, to occupy the finest throne in Europe." But the question is, Dominic, what will she do with that power?
Anyone could see that Marie Antoinette would dominate the new king. So says John Hardman in his book Marie Antoinette, The Making of a French Queen. Now, that idea that Louis XVI, who of course is a very ill-fated king, because as most of our listeners will know, he ends up having an appointment with the guillotine. Is it fair to say, Tom, that he is merely her puppet? He is a weaker man, isn't he, than Marie Antoinette? And they... Well, let's talk about their relationship a bit. So do they get on? Are they a happy couple, would you say?
There are significant incompatibilities, I think it's fair to say. So we could just go through some of them. So one is attitudes to music.
Okay.
So Marie Antoinette is very, very musical. She can play the harp, she can play the harpsichord, she can play the flute. Her brother, Joseph II, who is ruling along with Maria Theresa, his mother, is the great patron of Mozart. Marie Antoinette had met Mozart when they were 6 years old.
Imagine meeting Mozart and you're the same age. You'd feel so inadequate, wouldn't you?
Yeah. So she is very, very musical. Louis XVI is notoriously hostile to the arts and to music in particular. And this becomes a kind of topic of gossip. So in the pamphlets, it's kind of, people laugh at him for his lack of musicality.
He's like a British culture secretary.
He is. Yes, he is.
No,
that's exactly
no knowledge
of
the arts or interest in any of the music or anything like that.
He might once have seen Star Wars, but that would be the limit of his cultural engagement. Yeah, so that's pretty much where he is. And then, of course, we mentioned the dog that Marie Antoinette was not allowed to bring into France because it was an Austrian dog. This dog was called Mops, and it was a pug. She's absolutely. This is, I think, is basically what makes her burst into tears and fall onto the bosom of the Comtesse de Noailles.
Yeah,
is being deprived of the dog. But listeners will be glad and relieved to know that she does, in due course, get reunited with Mops. So that's happy. Louis hates dogs, and more particularly, I'm sad to say, as a cat owner, he hates cats.
He's right. He's right in that regard, but hating dogs is
no.
Madness.
He's not.
It's
He's
madness.
absolutely not.
Cats are rubbish.
Because he takes it to an unacceptable degree, which is, so as Dauphin, his favourite activity was to shoot cats on the
love it. Love it
on the roofs of Versailles. So he's shooting strays.
Yeah,
and this apparently is acceptable for sport in Versailles. But he accidentally shoots the Angora cat of the Comtesse de Maurepas. And when he does this, he's actually very upset and he apologises profusely. It's a story that does kind of, I think, sum up an aspect of his character, which is that on one level, he's very heedless of the suffering, whether of cats or of people out in the fields of La France Profonde. Mm-hmm. But on another level, when he's informed of kind of individual examples of suffering, he's very upset about it and worried about it.
I think you're too harsh though, saying he's heedless of. I don't think he's any more heedless than anybody else sealed off in the Palace of Versailles would be from
Right, but I think if you're shooting stray cats, I mean, you just assume this is the kind of thing that a king does, or it's acceptable sport. But when it's brought home to him what the implications are, then he worries about it. And I think you could say the same about his relationship to the broader troubles out in France, that he's not aware of it until he's informed about it, and then he doesn't really know what to do.
Yeah, he's not casual about it, but he's perhaps slightly oblivious to it. Now his big thing is hunting, isn't it? We've had two tremendous huntsmen on The Rest is History recently, Franz Ferdinand and the Kaiser,
and Custer,
and three. And actually, Louis, that would be a brilliant hunting party with those four men, because Louis XVI is a tremendous huntsman. He absolutely adores it, and he keeps a journal where he writes down how many animals he's killed. So the famous thing that everybody says on the day of the fall of the Bastille in 1789, that he wrote in his journal, rien, as in nothing happened today. That's rubbish. Actually, the nothing was because he hadn't killed any animals that day, so a very disappointing day.
I mean, I think it's also fair to say that he's not a great diarist. So on the day he meets Marie Antoinette, he says, met Mademoiselle la Dauphine.
All right.
And the day his mother dies, he says, my mother died.
Okay. Like Camus' L'Étranger. My mother died today or yesterday. I don't remember.
It's obviously a French tradition.
Yeah.
So he's not a great diarist, and as you said, he is a great huntsman. But I think that one of the reasons why he adores it so much is that he's very good at it. So he's a very good horseman, but when he's on his own 2 feet, he's incredibly kind of maladroit, and socially as well as physically. So he hates dancing. He's not good at kind of chit chat. He's not good at the kind of all the stuff that people at Versailles are doing. He doesn't really like it, and basically, he has the soul of a naval engineer.
Yeah.
So he loves fleets. He loves harbours. And he loves tinkering with locks. He has his own workshop.
Oh, I love this stuff. Simon Sharma is brilliant on this. So he's got this study, hasn't he, with all these maps and nautical instruments, and he will just sit there with a lock, like messing around, surrounded by all this stuff. He's like a tinkering inventor. And actually, I think that comes over as quite endearing.
So Sharma writes, the struggle to make the perfect lock, so this is something that Louis XVI is doing, was a symbol of sublime aptness for the monarch who repeatedly failed to make things turn as he wished. But in his appartement privé, he moved silently in his plain frock coat amidst polished lenses, armillary spheres, burnished brass and orreries, with all the freedom and power of a magus.
Oh, I love that. I mean, let me just say one thing right at the outset. For those people who haven't read it, or have maybe heard about it and just can't be bothered to read it because it's quite long, Simon Sharma's book Citizens
is insanely enjoyable.
Is just. I mean, I know it's always tempting to be revisionist and to say of a great historian and a great book, it's actually rubbish. It is tip top. It is brilliant. Every page
and has great pictures as well.
It does.
So so Marie Antoinette would have enjoyed that.
Yes, she would. She would have looked at the pictures. That's
book
nice.
With pictures.
Yeah.
But Dominic, just to say that there is an alternative perspective on this, which is the perspective of pamphleteers, one of whom describes him as a zombie who spends his time making locks and bolts. And you may wonder, well, where is this tone coming from? Well, I think it's coming from the Prince Harry of Versailles, who is the Comte de Provence,
right?
Who is consumed with envy and spleen. Right. So he is feeding all kinds of kind of hostile material out to the pamphleteers. But I think it also reflects the fact that the ultimate incompatibility, it seems, certainly in the early years of the marriage, is sexual. And if there's one thing that a French king is supposed to do, it's to be sexually voracious. So it is better to be Louis XV, an absolute goat.
Who was this bloke's grandfather, by the way, just to clarify.
Than to be sexually incompetent, which is clearly what Louis XVI is. And it takes them 7 years to consummate the marriage. And there was much debate at the time, and there is much debate to this day about what the problem was. So a favoured thesis is that Louis XVI suffered from a condition called phimosis, which basically means that the foreskin covers the head of the penis, which means that it's very difficult erections become very painful. I think the consensus now, I gather, I don't quite know how they've arrived at this consensus, is that this isn't the case.
Theo has written in the chat, thanks Tom, and I'm sure many other listeners are also very grateful to you for that slightly unnecessary detail.
It's not unnecessary, because actually the question of why the king and queen are not having children is a matter of profound state.
And
I think
discussed, Tom, but at the highest level. So
absolutely,
Joseph
and at the lowest level.
So Joseph II, who is the Emperor of Austria and who's Marie Antoinette's brother, she must have told him about it, because he writes to another brother and says, I mean, I'm not going to go into all the gory details, but he basically says they do try to have marital relations. Louis and I quote, stays there without moving for perhaps 2 minutes, and then says goodnight.
Withdraws.
Yes,
and says,
yeah.
Okay.
I was omitting that detail because I thought,
Yeah.
I'm
But
not
it's
as keen on
important, isn't
the.
it?
But anyway,
But
he
it's
says
important.
goodnight. Thank you very much. All good, and they're not actually completing the necessary act. And basically, they need doctors or courtiers or whoever to explain to them.
Well, according to tradition, that comment, Joseph II makes that report after he's been on a trip to Versailles, and he's spoken to both the king and the queen. And the tradition is that he explains what needs to be done to Louis XVI with reference to a lock and a key.
Right.
As a
he would
kind of,
enjoy the
as a-
lock analogy. I just find the whole thing very slightly implausible, but anyway.
And there's no question that this makes him a kind of object of some contempt, which in many ways is unfair, because I think you're right. He is dutiful, he is hardworking, he is conscientious. He does develop a reputation for kindness, maybe cats accepted. But there is this sense that he is, I don't know, he's a bit of a... So Chantal Thomas writes, for a sovereign, the line between goodness and imbecility was easily crossed. And I think that Louis XVI is on that line, that people can admire him or respect him as a good man, while simultaneously despising him as someone who is incompetent or useless as a sovereign.
He's not an impressive man. He's not a charismatic or formidable man. He doesn't inspire respect. He's probably quite a nice man, but a weak man. Is that fair, Tom?
I think probably, yes. I think it's felt that he is not of royal material, really. But having said that, whether it's Joseph II or not who manages to explain to him what he's got to do, they do finally get together, and Marie Antoinette gives Louis 4 children, including, crucially, 2 sons. So a dauphin and a spare, which is obviously very important. And they end up quite a devoted couple. So he does not, amazingly, he doesn't take a mistress. So on one level, that of course only enhances the idea of him, that he's not a kind of the libertine.
He's not an alpha male.
He's not an alpha male. But on another, he's kind of upholding an almost bourgeois standard of kind of marital fidelity. He banishes Madame du Barry, who gets packed off. And Madame du Barry, like Madame du Pompadour before her, had this splendid kind of grace and favour residence in the grounds of Versailles, kind of little chateau called the Petit Trianon. And Louis gives this to Marie Antoinette. So now it's the Queen's.
Yeah.
And she absolutely loves it, because, we've talked about how resentful and hostile she is to the kind of stifling etiquette of Versailles. The Petit Trianon offers her a bolt hole.
Yeah.
And it gives her the perfect opportunity to vent all her, qualities of spontaneity and simplicity and impulse that she loves.
So on that, you were saying about her not reading a book. Simon Sharma says in Citizens, like all adolescent girls of her generation, she drank deep at the well of sentimental literature. Her library was full of Samuel Richardson, Rousseau, Mercier, Restif de Breton, etc. Now, her library was full of them. Maybe she didn't necessarily read them. But as Sharma says, she is steeped in the culture that is the most modern, fashionable, forward-looking culture. She's not stuck in the mud. She's not a relic of the Ancien Regime. She's interested particularly in the stuff that people associate with the philosopher, the thinker Rousseau, which are virtue, simplicity, nature, a sort of, as you said, spontaneity, and a kind of...
and these are all qualities that will come to be seen in due course as features of the revolution. But Marie Antoinette is a massive enthusiast for them, so much so that amazingly in 1782 she goes and visits Rousseau's grave outside Paris. So she's a kind of a pilgrim.
So you think she's picked up the ideas but not read the books, basically? Is that...
I don't know. There's kind of... I don't know. I think it's perfectly possible to kind of I mean, she's probably skimmed through it.
Yeah,
Who knows?
or being told. I think that's perfectly possible too, by the way. I think that's how most people actually pick up fashionable ideas, isn't it? They pick these days. You pick them up on Facebook or in conversation, but you don't necessarily read the wellspring.
Yeah, and she is, for that reason, very, very fashionable, because her lack of enthusiasm for fashion as prescribed by Versailles itself becomes the fashion. And she, I mean, the enthusiasm for Rousseau, the idea that one should lead a simple, unadorned life, and that this is the key to virtue. At the Petit Trianon, the emphasis is on hiding the presence of servants. So in Versailles, it's all about having as many servants as possible. You know, every time Marie Antoinette gets dressed, hundreds of maids surround her to do it. In the Petit Trianon, it's different. And kind of famously, she commissions a landscape architect to design her an amour rustique, a kind of a rustic hamlet, a rustic village that has cows with ribbons on, alpine sheep, a watermill. And this, of course, becomes notorious because it's the idea of a queen pretending to be a shepherdess that strikes up all kinds of unfortunate resonances. But she is the embodiment of fashion.
But only notorious because the revolution happens.
Yeah,
I mean,
I think so.
had France's finances been in better shape, and there's no revolution,
People would be charmed by this.
yeah, people would say it's an entertaining quirk of 18th century, monarchical life. They wouldn't think anything of it.
Yeah, and far from saying that the poor should eat cake, she's very worried about the poor.
Okay.
I mean, the poor as kind of represented by photogenic paupers who can be given charity by
She's
her.
the Angelina Jolie of the 18th century, Tom.
So 1785, she lodges and feeds 12 poor families at the Petit Trianon. But there's a quality of the fact that I think she's very impressed by the sense she has of her own virtue.
Right.
And she wants people to know about it.
Yeah.
While simultaneously, genuinely being worried about it. I mean, all of those things can be true. And she wants to make sure that her children are raised in this. She's a very, very good mother, a very attentive mother. So 1784, the year before that, it had been a terrible winter. And she provides her children with what one of her companions describes as a lesson in doing good by bringing in a great kind of pile of toys and then saying, you can't have these because we're going to sell these toys and use them to get blankets and bread among children in need.
That's very.
So-
That's
It's
quite
very,
surprising.
very,
Yeah. It's quite
very
Dickensian.
celebrity on
I think.
Twitter.
Yeah, it's very Dickensian.
yeah, that as well. So Chantal Thomas describes this wonderfully. She was fond of charity and never tired of the spectacle of her own goodness. So I think, again, she is a precursor of a kind of modern type of celebrity there. Kind of celebrity charity.
Duchess of Sussex, Tom.
Yes, well, yeah, a slight quality there. So that's on the kind of the moral level. But she also creates this kind of new kind of fashion that is absolutely repudiating the kind of the stiff formality of Versailles. So she has this dressmaker, Rose Bertin, who shockingly is allowed ready access to her apartments.
Yeah.
She doesn't go through all the court protocols that normally restricts people who can see the Queen. And basically, Marie Antoinette is kind of discarding all the rich silks of the court for flowing white muslins, for kind of simple costumes, fresh flowers, kind of bucolic adornments.
Right, and not only that, she stops wearing corsets and stays and all those things that kind of really button you up. It's very Rousseau.
Go back to nature.
It's going back to nature. Sharma says you can see the natural cut line of. You can actually see what her body looks like under the dress, which of course was not the case with the incredibly rigid and structured dresses that people are wearing 10 or 20. Well, it's not they're wearing them earlier. They're wearing them at the same time, but she is breaking with the rules of French kind of hierarchical dress.
Absolutely. And there's a sense that, I said that Marie Antoinette in a way invents modern fashion. And she does that because she whatever the French say, she is the Queen of France. So she, in a sense, is the most for that reason. She has the highest profile of any woman in Europe, but also because she's a genius at it. And the idea of waking up every morning and just deciding what you want to wear, what clothes you're going to have, how you're going to do your hair, rather than having it prescribed according to rigid structures, is something revolutionary. And it's literally revolutionary, because this is the style of fashion that will come in during the French Revolution. And Marie Antoinette, to that extent, I think is the godmother of France's modern reputation as the home of fashion.
Oh.
And it's, and it's not, and we've talked about clothes, there is also hair. So there's an absolutely wonderful book with the great title Marie Antoinette's Head by Will Bashaw, which is about her hairdresser, who is a man called Monsieur Léonard, who will feature throughout the story.
Right.
And again, this is very, very shocking that he's a male hairdresser, so not female, not a lady's maid. He's a celebrity hairdresser, and he, like Madame Bertin, has ready access to her. So there's something very, very diva about this. I mean, it's absolutely recognizable. And he gives her a whole succession of kind of unbelievably grandiose hairstyles. So they're called the hairstyle that Marie Antoinette is initially promoting is called le pouf sentimental, which is such a and these are the ones that people will immediately
the sentimental poof. I mean, that's a hard sentence to carry off, right?
It's kind of that you can imagine the kind of teased up gauze and plumes and things. Very, very risky, because there are candles in the chandeliers, so if you brush against it, it might just go up in flames. And there are various kind of styles. So you have the hérisson, which is unpowdered hair. So that's kind of going back to nature there, slight hint of going back to nature. And they're kind of curled to the tips and rising in tiers, so it looks like an hérisson, a hedgehog. There's the zephyr, which is flowers woven into the hair. So again, there's the sense that you're moving from kind of stiff formality to nature. And then in 1781, Monsieur Léonard is summoned by Marie Antoinette, who's distraught because she feels that she's losing her hair. Her hair is thinning. And Monsieur Léonard is devastated by this. And he goes away and he thinks about it. And then he comes back and he does something revolutionary. He cuts her hair. He gives her the coiffure à l'enfant, the child's hairstyle.
Yeah.
And he starts to decorate it only with flowers, not with jewels. And it creates this fashion for natural hairstyles that spreads across Versailles, spreads across Paris, spreads across France, spreads across Europe.
And she has people who are around her, doesn't she? She has, you use the expression, her squad, which makes sound like Taylor Swift. But she does have this coterie of very, very close friends who will later become, like her, controversial, some of whom, frankly, are doomed to incredibly tragic and blood-curdling ends.
Yes. I mean, so there are two in particular. There's the Duchesse de Polignac, who, is very, very beautiful, exquisite manners, absolutely adores kind of gossip and intrigue. So I think it's kind of less Taylor Swift. It's more the plastics in Mean Girls, which I know you haven't seen, but which I, as a parent of two daughters, have seen a lot. Mm-hmm. Brilliant, brilliant film. And I think that anyone who's seen that film, if you think of Marie Antoinette and the Duchesse de Polignac as the plastics, who are the kind of the queen bees in a high school, and then there's another there's this sidekick who's always trying to make fetch happen, the word fetch, and she never does. And I think that character would be the Princesse de Lamballe, who is very, very vapid. So it's there's a kind of brilliantly bitchy account of her by the Comtesse de Gemly. She never had an opinion of her own. In conversation, she always adopted the opinion of the person who passed for the wittiest in a way that was utterly unique. Whenever there was a serious discussion, she never spoke, pretending to fall into a trance. Then she would suddenly appear to snap out of her reverie and repeat word for word, as though it came from her, what the person whose opinion she had decided to adopt had just said. She affected great surprise when told someone had just said the same thing. She assured everyone she hadn't heard of it. So I think you get there a sense that this is not, Marie Antoinette likes these people precisely because they are not witty. they're not brilliant. She can enjoy their company. Inevitably, gossip will say that they're all lesbians, that they're all engaging in sapphic rites. The Duchess de Polignac in particular, who becomes widely hated, but both of them are strongly disliked. There are also male guests going to the Petit Trianon, of whom the most notorious is a dashing Swedish officer called Axel von Fersen, who is the son of a field marshal and who had met Marie Antoinette at a masked ball at the Opera in 1774 when she was still the Dauphine, and he hadn't recognized her, which is obviously a kind of great thrill for Marie Antoinette.
Yeah.
And from that point on, there are regular visits. The two indisputably become close. Again, it is taken for granted that they are sleeping. I think this is most unlikely.
Because it's not really in
Most
her
improbable.
character.
It's
you think,
not
yeah.
her style.
Yeah.
No, and it would be mad for her to do that. But there is clearly a kind of heedlessness about this. I mean, to have these kind of very close, intimate relationships,
Yeah.
and to kind of thumb her nose at the formalities and the hierarchies of Versailles, to bring down everything that the Comtesse de Noailles had represented. I mean, she's building up trouble for herself.
She is. There's an amazing quotation actually from her brother, Joseph II, who wrote to their brother, Leopold. And he said, "She has no etiquette. She goes out and runs around alone or with a few people without the outward signs of her position. She looks a little improper. And while this would be all right for a private person, she is not doing her job." And that is the issue, isn't it? That she's not playing the part of a French queen as the French people expect.
No, she's not. And I think what is more, and even more damaging for her, is that she's actually playing the part of a mistress. Because the Petit Trianon is where the mistress lives. And queens are not supposed to live like mistresses. And so, over the course of Louis XVI's reign, going into the 1780s, she is, she's coming to be hated as queens often are hated, as kind of, the embodiment of royal arrogance and of kind of absolutism. But she's also being hated as favourites are. She's being cast as a kind of a voracious, greedy, blood-sucking nymphomaniac.
Yeah.
And the pair of these images are kind of being fused, because a mistress is always being accused of extravagance.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what they're
Comes with the territory,
there
right?
to do.
Yeah.
And kind of amazingly, stories start to be repeated that Marie Antoinette is literally maintaining, at the expense of the state, a whole tank full of leeches, which is a kind of horrible idea.
Yeah, a sort of metaphor, yeah.
And also, of course, mistresses are sexually promiscuous. And so this is why the stories that she's having, sapphic affairs and sleeping with, Swedish officers and things like that. It's why they have such currency.
And the interesting thing about that, Tom, is that they start, I think it's Robert Darnton makes this point, that they start in 1774, so 15 years before the revolution, and when she's still only 18, 19 years old. So very early on, these stories that she has this kind of voracious sexual appetite, that her Locke-obsessed husband is not satisfying, and that, there's this kind of extravagance and depravity sucking the energy and the money out of France. They start very early, don't they? And she's never able to shake them.
Right. And to reiterate, because I think this is so important, these stories are not coming from Republican people who hate the monarchy. It's coming from her rivals at the court. These are the people who are spreading it. And it reflects a culture among the nobility. And it reflects, I think, a character of libertinism that you get at the court, that Louis XV had exemplified, and which you get in Leclos' great novel, Dangerous Liaisons.
Yeah.
Translated the film, people who've seen the film. I mean, the whole thing is about debauching people, the idea that the aristocracy are cruel and sexually predatory. And of course, the writer who absolutely exemplifies this is the Marquis de Sade, who we did an episode on. And there's a sense in which the Marquis de Sade is reworking ideas that are very, very current in pornography at the time. And Marie Antoinette, who had refused to speak to Madame du Barry because she'd been a courtesan, who had been so unsexually voracious that she, the marriage hadn't been consummated for 7 years. She comes to be the kind of the protagonist of pornographic fantasies that are increasingly revolting and shocking in the way that the Marquis de Sade's writings are revolting and shocking. And listeners may be wondering, well, does any of this matter? And it does matter, because it comes to threaten the reputation not just of the Queen, but of the King and of the monarchy itself. The thing is that in the early 1780s, all these rumours and stories and fantasies, they lack an obvious focus. They are underground. They are being percolated by kind of court rivalries. But then in 1784, there's an absolute catastrophe, because Marie Antoinette finds herself engulfed in a complete firestorm of scandal. And actually, Dominic, it's not just a scandal, it's an affair.
The affair of the diamond necklace. And Tom, what an amazing story this is. Thank you so much for that. I think there's only one expression, given that we are in 18th century France. That was a genuine tour de force. And on that bombshell, au revoir, everybody.
À demain.
Today's episode is about the scandal of the diamond necklace. So before we get into the diamond necklace and what it means for Marie Antoinette, for Louis XVI, and for the French Revolution, tell us why you've chosen to kick off with the Marriage of Figaro and what is going on.
So the Marriage of Figaro, which, if people haven't seen the play, they may have seen the opera, which was adapted by Mozart. And it tells the story of the wedding day of Figaro, who is the servant of a lecherous and arrogant Spanish count called Count Almaviva. And Figaro has just got married to Suzanne, who is the maid of the Countess, the Count's wife. And the Count, who is, I mean, you know, he makes Louis XV, who we had in the previous episode, look an absolute model of chastity. He wants to exercise the traditional droit de seigneur over Suzanne, so the right of a lord to bed whoever of his dependents he wants to. And all kinds of farcical shenanigans ensue, Dominic.
Love a farcical shenanigan.
Lots of cross-dressing, lots of hiding in cupboards, jumping out of windows, all kinds of things like that. But the plot ends up in a garden by night, and the Countess and Suzanne have kind of teamed up, and they've got this plan to basically publicly humiliate the Count and kind of get him to reform out of shame. And so to that end, they've swapped clothes so that the Count will mistake his wife, the Countess, for the maid, Suzanne, and vice versa. So it's a kind of classic French farce. And Figaro is worried that Suzanne is going to sleep with the Count, even though they've just got married. He's furious about it. You know, he's very upset that the Count is behaving like this, understandably. And he also thinks that Suzanne is betraying him. And so he's assembled a large crowd to catch the Count and Suzanne in flagrante, because he thinks this is what's going to happen. But it all ends very happily.
Hurrah.
So because Suzanne is very indignant that Figaro wouldn't trust her, reveals the whole plot to him. The couple are reconciled. They have a kiss. The Count sees them kissing and thinks that Figaro is getting off with his wife, the Countess. Absolutely explodes, orders them all to be arrested. The crowd summoned by Figaro kind of assemble on the stage to with flaming torches and everything. At this point, the Countess emerges and reveals who she is. The Count realizes that he's been an absolute bounder, that he's been tricked, and there's a long pause, and then he falls to his knees and begs for forgiveness. In the opera, I mean, it's a stunningly beautiful moment. And the Countess does forgive him, and everyone is forgiven. And the last line of the plays, which is accompanied by music, is everything finishes with songs. So there's this idea that the class tensions and the iniquities of the aristocracy can be resolved with beautiful music.
But at the time, this play by Beaumarchais, 1784, incredibly controversial in France.
Unbelievably.
Because it was seen as so radical in that it was upturning the social order. There are lots of jokes and remarks and allusions to censorship or the way the justice system works, or the fear of being locked up in the Bastille. And it's now, when in Robert Darnton's brilliant book, The Revolutionary Temper, there's a whole chapter about the controversy about the Marriage of Figaro and how that foreshadows the revolution.
Yeah, and this is I mean, people listening to that praise, they were able to keep track of it. They may be wondering, how could a farce like this have this kind of incredible reputation? I mean, it had it at the time, and it had it in the revolution. So Danton, who we'll be coming to, one of the great revolutionary leaders, he says of it, it killed off the nobility. I mean, you might think actually it's the guillotine that does that, but Danton says no, it's the Marriage of Figaro. And Napoleon says of the play, because we remember we did the episodes on the young Napoleon, didn't we? He loved a play.
Yeah.
And he said that, this is the revolution in action avant la révolution. This is what the revolution is going to become.
Right.
So the obvious question then, if it is as incendiary as contemporaries thought, how on earth did it come to be staged? And not only come to be staged, but become, unbelievably famous. It kind of in the way that a blockbusting Hollywood movie today might be, kind of going completely viral, copied, parodied. So, the fact that Mozart turns it into an opera within 2 years of it being premiered is a kind of indication of the cultural cachet that it has, and the celebrity and indeed the notoriety. And the truth is that the difficulty of getting it on stage becomes part of Beaumarchais' marketing strategy. So he gives the finished script to the Comédie Française in 1781. And they say, yeah, this is brilliant. So it's the sequel to an earlier play that had also featured Figaro and the Count. So they're very keen to put it on, but it takes them 3 years to get on. And the reason for that is that the king is massively offended by it. He calls it detestable, and he repeatedly tries to ban it. But he reckons without two things. And one of them is Beaumarchais himself, who is an amazing figure, incredibly charismatic, extraordinary life. He'd been a royal agent in London. He'd been sent there to protect Madame du Barry from the Louis XV's mistress from a libelous pamphlet. He'd had all kinds of dealings with the Chevalier d'Eon, who is a diplomat who people think may even have been female, but kind of cross-dresser. And again, kind of cross-dressing is a kind of theme throughout the Marriage of Figaro. He ends up running guns to the Americans. He publishes the complete works of Voltaire, the great wit and philosophe. So an amazing guy, and is brilliant at self-publicity. And he uses the censorship battle to publicize the play. And he's able to do this by exploiting what we were talking about in the previous episode, that there are different factions in the court. And lots of the nobility who are opposed to the stuffiness of the king think it's very, very funny to get the play on. And one of the people who thinks it's funny to get the play on is the Queen herself,
so Marie Antoinette, who we talked about the last time, who's been behaving in a way that they think is not suitable for a queen because of her love of the kind of Rousseauist nature and simplicity and stuff. Yeah. And because she's kind of got a girlishness to her, a lightness, and French queens are meant to be heavy. And she thinks it's hilarious, doesn't she? She thinks it's really funny.
So Simon Schama in Citizen says, the more outrageous the denunciations of the established order, the better the Queen liked it.
And that's because the people that she doesn't get on with at the court are the kind of rigid, formal, old guard kind of people.
Yeah.
And they're the kind of people to some degree who don't like this play and are being mocked by it, right? So she's naturally on the side of lightness and laughter, Tom.
Absolutely. And one of the king's brothers, so not the Comte de Provence, who is the kind of particularly embittered one, but the younger brother, the Comte d'Artois, who's very close to Marie Antoinette. I mean, he loves it as well. He pushes for it to be on. And so it becomes a massive, massive succès d'estime, not just among, the ordinary mass of theatre goers, but among the nobility. And again, Schama in his account of this quotes an aristocrat, Henriette de Freudenstein, who describes all the aristocrats in the audience slapping themselves on their own cheeks, laughing at their own expense, and even worse, making others laugh too, a strange blindness.
So that's the Marriage of Figaro. But what nobody knows when they're laughing along, slapping their cheeks or whatever they're doing, what nobody knows is that in just a few weeks' time, there will begin an affair, scandal, that makes the story of the Marriage of Figaro, the farcical goings-on, look humdrum and unfunny and colourless by comparison. And this is the beginning of this tremendous scandal, the affair of the diamond necklace, Tom. And this kicks off, I think, am I right in saying on the 11th of August, 1784, so just a few months later?
Yeah, so the Marriage of Figaro has premiered in the spring of 1784, and as you say, on the 11th of August, something happens. an event happens that weirdly echoes the kind of the climactic scene in The Marriage of Figaro, but kind of, as you said, ramps it up to a scandalous degree. So that evening, a milliner, a Parisian milliner called Nicole Legay, who has been reduced to prostitution by the exactions of loan sharks, or so she says, is driven to Versailles. And to quote Jonathan Beckman, who is not only a historian but plays cricket with me in The Authors, but I'm not just saying this, has written a brilliant account of the whole scandal, How to Ruin a Queen. His description of Nicole: she was young, pretty and broke, and with her broad forehead, her straight chiselled nose and her small protuberant mouth, she resembled Dominic, no one so much as Marie Antoinette. So she gets driven to Versailles, and she's greeted there by a woman who calls herself the Vicomtesse de Valois, who tells Nicole something amazing, that the Queen has personally requested that her, Nicole, do the Queen a favour, and that in return Nicole will be given 15,000 livres, which is a lot of money for an impecunious prostitute. And more than that, because she's doing the Queen a favour, she will be given a title. The Vicomtesse de Valois says that from this point on, Nicole will be known as the Baronne d'Oliva, and that is Oliva, which is kind of an anagram of Valois, almost an anagram of Valois.
What are the chances?
So Nicole's suspicions are not aroused by this, it has to be said at the time. In fact, she's just incredibly bewildered, but the chance to have a title and lots of money.
Yeah. Why wouldn't you take it?
What's not to like? So the next day, she stayed at Versailles. The next day, she's dressed in a kind of a plain but expensive white muslin dress. And people who heard our previous episodes will know that this is the kind of signature costume of Marie Antoinette herself. And she's given a demi bonnet which covers her face, but kind of enables people to see her lips. The Vicomtesse then hands, let's call her d'Oliva, because that's now her title, a tiny letter, and says that she is going to lead her into the park at Versailles, into one of the gardens, and that when she gets there, a noble seigneur will be waiting, and she's to hand this letter over, plus a rose, and that as she hands the letter and the rose over, she is to say to this seigneur, "You know what this means," and that's all she has to do.
Yeah.
And so at midnight, the Baronne d'Oliva, as she seems to have become, is taken out into the gardens. And she is told, as she's being led, that the Queen is watching her to make sure that she, does everything that the Queen has requested. So the Baronne d'Oliva, Nicole, aka Nicole the impecunious milliner, is standing in the gardens. The kind of roses around, faint splashing of fountains in the distance, the stars are blazing in the sky. And not long afterwards, she sees a man approaching her. And this is a man in a long black cassock and a very kind of broad-brimmed floppy hat. He comes up to her, and the poor Baronne is terrified. She doesn't know who this person is. She's in the royal gardens. What's going on? But she kind of summons up her courage, and she hands over the rose. And she says, as she's been instructed to do, "You know what this means." She's just about to hand over the letter when there's suddenly a kind of an uproar, the torches in the distance, the sound of footsteps coming, and the Baronne's arm is grabbed, pulled into the bushes. It's the Vicomtesse who's got hold of her, hurries her back, takes her into her private quarters. And the Baronne d'Oliva, Nicole, apologizes that she hasn't been able to hand over the letter. But nobody seems to care. Instead, there's a big meal. The wine flows, and they go to bed. And in the morning, the Vicomtesse shows Nicole, the Baronne d'Oliva, a letter that she has received from Marie Antoinette. And she reads the letter out. "I'm very happy, my dear Countess, with the person you procured for me. She played her role to perfection." At this point, the Vicomtesse rips up the letter because she says it is not the kind of letter that one should carry around. So there is no evidence for any of this that's happened. The Vicomtesse then hands over a third of the fee that's been promised. And then the Baronne d'Oliva is driven back into Paris. From this point on, there is no further reference to her title. So she goes back to being Nicole, and there is no further money. And that seems to be the end of the matter. All Very, very strange.
And this is from Nicole's own account, isn't it?
This is from Nicole. Well, it's from the account of her lawyer.
Yeah, everything you're going to hear in this story comes from the accounts given by different lawyers who would publish, to make money, they would publish memoirs of what their clients had told them. And so
but also, Dominic, to be fair, to try and get their clients off.
Yes, of course.
See.
So this is Nicole's story.
Yeah.
So, Tom, a very kind of Mozart-friendly episode, this.
It's very, very
The
Mozart.
Queen looking on, presumably a mysterious suitor in the darkness, the roses handed over, all of this kind of thing.
I mean, it's made for an opera.
Yeah. Turn on the lights for us and tell us, first of all, who is that mysterious man in the cassock that the Queen appears to be giving a rose to?
Well, he is an amazingly important figure in the French noble hierarchy. He's a man called Louis de Rohan, and he is a scion of the grandest non-royal family in France. So he traces his lineage back to the one-time kings of Brittany.
Mm-hmm.
And so he has the Rohan have this phrase: "Roi ne puis, prince ne daigne, Rohan suis." I cannot be king. I won't be a prince. I am Rohan.
Right.
So, it's better to be Rohan than to be a king or a prince.
Theoden will agree with that, Tom.
Of course. And in his role as a Rohan, he gets to inherit the bishopric of Strasbourg, which brings with it a cardinalate. So he becomes, in 1779, he inherits this, and he becomes the Cardinal de Rohan. And in his character, he's he's a very generous man, but in other ways, I mean, he's the kind of person who would very easily be taken in by a confidence trickster.
He's basically
I think
a character from a sort of Ben Jonson play or something, or a Moliere play.
He's the kind of person who, if he got an email from someone saying, "I need your I need your passport details and £100,000, please send it here," he would do it. Yeah. So there was an abbé who'd been at the seminary with him, but when they were young, who remembered him as haughty, inconsiderate, unreasonable spendthrift, not very bright, fickle in his tastes and his friendships. But as I say, he does have two good qualities. He's very generous, and Dominic, he's an Anglophile.
So
these are
positives.
positives.
Won't hear a word against him.
The problem is, though, that he has infuriated Marie Antoinette. Marie Antoinette hates him. And the reason for that is he'd gone to Vienna as ambassador. And because he's an Anglophile, he doesn't really like the Austrians. And he's always writing rude letters about Maria Theresa, Marie Antoinette's mother, to his confidants at Versailles. And one of them reads out something rude he said about Maria Theresa, and it gets back to Marie Antoinette. So she's very upset about this. And he's also gone around, when he comes back from Vienna, he's in Versailles, he loves a bit of gossip, he's not very bright. He goes around accusing Marie Antoinette of having an affair with the Comte d'Artois, the younger brother.
It's very reckless of him.
Yeah, it's mad. And also he says of the Queen, she displays a coquettishness that prepares the way for an accomplished lover to succeed with her. Mad.
Yeah, why would you...
So it's
just... he's foolish and he lets his tongue run away with him, clearly.
And people who've seen Dangerous Liaisons or read the book, the book by Leclos, written at exactly this period. I mean, this is exactly what's going on. It's people kind of gossiping about each other, overhearing it, reading letters that aren't meant for them, all this kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it's absolutely part of the climate. But the Cardinal de Rohan is not smart enough, really, to profit from it. And so he's distraught that he feels that now that Marie Antoinette is standing in the way of him getting the kind of promotion that he feels should be his right as a Rohan. So he'll do anything to try and get her back. And it's at this point that an impecunious woman with a sob story approaches him.
Yeah.
And this is a woman called Jeanne de la Motte. And she claims descent from the Valois, who are the traditional royal family who kind of gone extinct in the 16th century,
that's
been replaced by the Bourbons.
That's obviously just rubbish to appeal to the cardinal, isn't it? I mean, she's a swindler.
Well, this is the story. This is her story. And she approaches the cardinal for some charity, which the cardinal gives her, and almost certainly they have an affair.
Are you gonna? How does that work? I'd like some charity, please. Oh, my dear, I've got some charity upstairs. Come through.
I think that's exactly how it works.
Right.
I think that's So the cardinal is a notorious womanizer, as cardinals in the Ancien Régime tend to be.
They've got to be by law, surely.
So having done that, Lamotte then thinks, do you know what? I'm going to aim higher. And she wants to get quarters in Versailles. And so she persuades the cardinal to introduce her to one of the sisters of Louis XVI. And Lamotte has prepared for this moment very, very skillfully. So she's introduced to the sister of Louis XVI and she faints. She's kind of overcome. Whether this is staged or whether it's real, I mean, who knows? But the consequence of this is that she is seen as an unfortunate who has suffered terrible things and therefore needs to be helped. And this plays into the spirit of kind of sentimentality that is and sensibility that is absolutely kind of current and associated with Marie Antoinette and her kind of her vibe at Versailles. And so she gets these quarters, and she then she starts telling the cardinal that she's become great friends with the Queen herself.
I mean, the Queen does have her. You referred to in the last episode as her squad, so it's not it's not that impossible. I mean, it could happen that she could become.
So the cardinal completely believes it, and Lamotte then starts saying, you know, the only way to get to Marie Antoinette's heart is to buy her the most notorious necklace in France. It had been made by the court jewellers Burma and Bassange, who had been commissioned by Louis XV to make this. It's called a kind of slave necklace because it looks like a kind of collar that a slave might wear. It consists of 647 diamonds, and these weigh 2,800 carats. So it is massively vulgar.
Yeah.
And so Jonathan Beckman describes it as grotesque and almost literally unbearable. It more resembled an item of chainmail or something a monk might wear in penitential self-chastisement than a coveted piece of jewellery.
It's a necklace that Donald Trump would buy for a lady of the night.
Yeah, for a porn star, perhaps, particularly if he was trying to quieten her. And unfortunately, the jewellers had never been able to give this to Madame du Barry because Louis XV had died. And so therefore, Madame du Barry had been chucked out of Versailles and wasn't in a position to buy it. And so they're stuck with this enormous bill and they need to sell it to someone. And so the obvious person is Marie Antoinette. So they keep saying, you know, Your Majesty, would you like to buy this? And it's not Marie Antoinette's style at all. I mean, it's kind of vulgar and
I think it's nature and simplicity and like, you know, falling curls and no corset and all that stuff.
And on top of that, of course, it had been made for Madame du Barry. So it kind of it's not just vulgar. It has associations with kind of courtesans.
Yeah.
So absolutely not her. And also she has been warned by both her mother and her husband, the king, you know, to stop displaying the bling, that it's not going down well. And also Monsieur Léonard, who we talked about, the hairdresser, he has been phasing jewels out from her hairstyle, going for the natural look, the flowers. So basically, it's not her thing at all. She does not want it. So you might think, well, you know, couldn't the cardinal have done some cursory research on this? And he'd have realised this is a mad thing. Marie Antoinette would never have wanted this necklace. But it's at this point, Dominic, that another figure steps into the story, and this is someone you're very keen on, isn't it? It's an Italian occultist called supposedly the Comte de Cagliostro.
Yeah, so his story is enough to take up multiple podcasts, but just to absolutely condense it, he told multiple different stories. Some of them he said he was the son of the master of the Knights of Malta, or a bigwig from Egypt, or from an Ottoman pasha. There were stories that he was 300 years old, that he was
even longer.
That he was 3,000
maybe 3,000 years old.
Yeah, stories that he'd been at the wedding in Cana in the Bible with Jesus and co. Basically, what seems to be the truth is that in reality, either he was born in Sicily, in the slums of Palermo, into a Jewish family, or he's the son of a coachman from Naples. We don't know which. He seems to have had time as an apprentice hairdresser.
A lot of hairdressers behaving badly.
And then he basically becomes a swindler, professional charlatan. He goes around, he says he's dreamed up a special Egyptian form of Freemasonry. He's got a fake countess wife, and she sells the package basically to aristocratic ladies. And he seems to have come into contact with the cardinal in Strasbourg in 1781. And the cardinal, as you said, Tom, is an absolute flipping dupe.
Oh.
Yeah. I mean, that's what the whole thing about being a character from Molière play. And that he believes all this stuff about Freemasonry, on the occult. He believes that Cagliostro is an alchemist. And there are stories, aren't there? And I think they're probably not true, but there are stories that Cagliostro is in on the plot and held seances and occult rituals to persuade Rohan, the Cardinal de Rohan, that the stuff about the necklace is true and that this is the way to Marie Antoinette's heart.
And of course, the thing is, always with confidence tricks, is that people have to want desperately to believe that what they're being told is the case. And it's not just the cardinal who wants to believe it; the jewelers do as well, because they want to recoup their investment. So November 1784. So this is a few months after the meeting in the gardens at Versailles. The cardinal gets a letter that has been signed Marie Antoinette de France, which is a signature she would never use because that's not diplomatic at all. And the cardinal, as a former diplomat, should have known this, but he doesn't. Mm-hmm. And in this letter, he gets informed that the cardinal is to acquire the necklace for the queen and that the queen will pay for it in 4 installments. So brilliant. The jewelers are delighted. The cardinal is delighted. This is his way back. So on the 29th of January, 1785, the jewelers give the cardinal the necklace. A courier then arrives who claims to be from the queen. The cardinal gives the necklace to this courier.
What a fool that cardinal is, Tom. I mean,
do you think it's the courier, Dominic? It's not.
No, who is it? Tell us who it is. Surprise us.
It's one of Lamotte's lovers.
Yeah, you astound me.
And he goes away. He gives it to Lamotte's husband. So that's very, very Marquis de Sade. Lots of. So the husband then breaks it up and he starts trying to fence the diamonds around Paris, but it's obviously dangerous to be doing it in Paris. So he then goes to London and starts doing it there. Meanwhile, of course, the jewelers are waiting for their money.
Yeah.
And the cardinal is waiting for signs of the queen's favour that he's been promised. And he goes to court and he's kind of waiting to see the queen with the necklace. Absolutely nothing. So early July, he thinks, I've got to see what's going on. So he sends Marie Antoinette a discreet note, kind of saying, very much looking forward to seeing these, wink, wink, I've got you, nudge, nudge.
Yeah.
And Marie Antoinette thinks he's mad.
Yeah, of course.
Just disposes of the letter.
Of course.
Early in August, the jewelers are so desperate because they're now facing bankruptcy that they go to one of Marie Antoinette's ladies in waiting and say, look, where's this money that the queen promised us? And they go to the queen and she's got no idea that any of this has been going on. And Marie Antoinette leads the investigation personally. Understandably, she's appalled. I mean, she's completely innocent, and yet her good name has been consistently abused throughout the entire affair. And she has this kind of dramatic declaration of purpose. Hideous vices must be unmasked. The purple of a cardinal and the title of a prince have cloaked a money grabber, a fraudster who dares to compromise the wife of his sovereign. France and all of Europe shall know of it. And so she goes to the king, and the king issues orders that the cardinal be arrested. And so he is on the 15th of August, and he is arrested while he is celebrating. He's holding mass to celebrate the Ascension of the Virgin in the chapel at Versailles. He's in his full robes, smoke, bells, the works. In come the king's guards. He's arrested and taken off to the Bastille.
Crikey, Tom. What a story this is. Napoleon Bonaparte in later life said that the death of Marie Antoinette began at the trial of the diamond necklace conspirators. And Tom, that's a big claim from Napoleon. I mean, who am I to argue with Napoleon?
Yeah.
Now, why would
he was there?
Why would one say that of something that on the surface seems a little bit inconsequential, and of course, in which the Queen is not really involved?
Right, because I guess if people said, "Well, the cause of the French Revolution," a scandal about a necklace would be low down the list.
Very low down the list, yeah.
Bread riots, fiscal incompetence, all kinds of things, which we will be looking at in due course. I think that the answer to why it is so damaging to the Queen is the way that the scandal comes to be teased out and the way that it goes public.
Yeah.
So what happens is that all the main participants in the scandal, so the Cardinal, Nicole, aka the Baron d'Oliva, the Comte de Cagliostro, and of course de la Motte, they're all arrested and they're all brought to trial. And the trials that they have are open. So, the proceedings can be reported. And so this means that the Queen had said, all of France and Europe shall hear of this. This is exactly what happens, but it doesn't work to her advantage.
Well, just on that, so the openness, I think it's important that people get a sense of what an enormous appetite for news and gossip there is in Paris, in particular, in the 1780s. So we mentioned earlier Robert Darnton's brilliant book, The Revolutionary Temper, and he talks in that about how all the different lawyers, we mentioned this, didn't we, in the first half, Tom, that the different lawyers of the various participants publish these, what they call these memoirs of the case while the case is going on. And these would go through multiple editions and they would sell tens of thousands of copies, and people would literally read them out in cafes and people would gather to read them together. It's a kind of collective experience of the news and of rumour and gossip. And this case is the perfect story for all that. And it actually ties together all these anxieties and sort of fantasies about Marie Antoinette that have been gathering pace for more than a decade. Go on, Tom.
And I think a kind of parallel, the closest parallel I can think of that from modern times would be the way in which the failure of the marriage of Prince Charles and Diana kind of exploded. There was gossip about it, there were whisperings about it, there was talk about it, and then suddenly it was all brought out into the open, and there was this absolute kind of firestorm of obsession. And I think that is basically what happens, and it's devastating for Marie Antoinette and for the crown generally, because all the protagonists in various ways come to be exonerated. Three of them are legally exonerated. Four of them are kind of basically exonerated before the bar of public opinion. And so the crown is left completely baffled and perplexed and wounded by this. So to go through the various, the participants in these trials, three of them, all of whom have been sent to the Bastille, and to be sent to the Bastille in this period, to go to the Bastille is the symbol of royal oppression. So it kind of immediately makes them heroes. People are instinctively on their side. So the cardinal, when he goes to the Bastille, he is improbably cast as a kind of victim of royal oppression. He becomes the people's cardinal.
But the thing is, Simon Sharma says in Citizens, he actually moved into a specially furnished apartment outside the prison where he spent 9 months entertaining a stream of distinguished visitors. Oysters and champagne were laid on as a collation for guests, and the cardinal was allowed choice works from his library and a retinue of servants to help him overcome the hardships of incarceration.
But the image is that they're, dripping water and clanking chains and rats and straw and everything. But it's not at all like that. And he says that he doesn't want the king to try it, basically because he doesn't trust the king. And so he says he wants to go to the Parlement de Paris. And the Parlement it's not a parliament. It's kind of like the High
Court,
And so he goes on court there. It's open. And the lawyer, his lawyer, presents him as, a kind of Rousseau-esque figure. A figure, who has, an excess of candour. He's at one with nature. He's not suited to the machinations of a corrupt and decadent court. He's Mother Nature's child, all that kind of thing. And also, he just wanted to serve the Queen. It was his chivalrous duty.
He's been made a fool of in this story, but he's not a conspirator. I mean, he's not a criminal. So they were right.
So there is a measure of truth there
to acquit him.
And so he does get acquitted. But the implications of this are devastating for Marie Antoinette, and Jonathan Beckman spells it out. Louis and Marie Antoinette could scarcely believe that the Parlement had, in effect, ruled that the Queen could be mistaken for the kind of woman who might arrange a midnight assignation, buy a ruinously expensive necklace without her husband's permission, and correspond in secret with a known roue.
Right, because if you're assuming that he could be easily fooled, then you're assuming that the possibility exists that she could have behaved like this. And we know, you and I know, and everybody who's read the books on her knows that she would never have behaved like this, but the French public have been primed to think that she might.
Yeah, absolutely. And he retires to Strasbourg, where he's greeted as a kind of, an oppressed innocent. So that's him. Nicole, the Baronne d'Oliva, the account that we gave, as we said, is that's basically derives from the lawyer that she has, who essentially casts her as the kind of heroine of a novel. And if it sounded like a novel, then I think, there may be kind of element of that. But I think the basic outline of what happened is true, but clearly it's been kind of slightly slightly
I mean, she is a victim.
enhanced.
She is a victim of it, really. She's
I think she
been
is.
made a tool.
Yes.
She's been made
She is.
a dupe of. Yeah.
And what makes people even more sympathetic is that in the Bastille, she's given birth to a baby, so that makes her even more of a kind of sentimental heroine of a Rousseau novel. The Comte de Cagliostro,
Yeah.
he has
character.
So in the Bastille, he continues to play the part of the Magus, the man who is 3,000 years old. So there's this brilliant detail in the interrogation in the Bastille. He's asked, do you have any regrets about the life that you've led? And Cagliostro replies, yeah, I feel terrible about the assassination of Pompey the Great and my role in that. Pompey the Great, the great rival of Julius Caesar, had been killed 2,000 years before. So that's brilliant. But once he gets to his trial, he immediately switches round and suddenly casts himself as a kind of cool Enlightenment skeptic. And he gets asked by the prosecution lawyer, why do you say that you're thousands of years old? And he says, I'm not. I'm 37.
Yeah. So a lot of the stories about Cagliostro, to be fair, come from like pamphlets about him rather than things himself. So the Pompey the Great story, I mean, he probably either said it as a joke or didn't say it. I mean, anyway, he's a good character. I like him. And actually, the government account, which was by Barrister Courtager, and which was in it, he wrote a memoir, and it was the sort of government approved one, basically said Cagliostro had nothing to do with this at all. He was like dragged in as exciting window dressing, but he wasn't really. He was apparently in Lyon when the whole thing was taking place anyway, so he probably...
Difficult to know because there are so many kind of rival. He's such a fraud.
Yeah,
that I don't think you can trust anything that he says. So it's difficult to know. But I mean, anyway, he gets off. I mean, people agree that he doesn't have anything to do with it. As for Jeanne de la Motte, the confidence trickster, she is convicted. The evidence against her is overwhelming. I mean, she's basically banged to rights. But amazingly, even she wins public sympathy.
Yeah.
And she does this by essentially her defense is that everything that she said was true, that Marie Antoinette was guilty, that she had wanted the necklace, that she had written loads of letters, that she was in Versailles. So she gets sentenced to life imprisonment in the Salpêtrière, which is it's a kind of former munitions factory, isn't it? That is notorious as the place where prostitutes get sent.
It's basically a prostitute's prison.
So she gets taken there, and she hasn't been told before the sentence is read to her what she's going to suffer. So she's taken to the prison. It's read out to her. She's told that she's going to be birched, branded, and be imprisoned for life. And she goes absolutely ballistic. She starts kind of scratching and
writhing around
and writhing. Yeah. She bites a chunk out of the executioner. She kind of swallows his flesh. So it is said, and she's pinned down, and the branding iron has V on it for voleuse, for thief. One of the brands is successfully imprinted, but the other one she's twisting so much that it burns her breast, and this kind of stench of roasting meat. So very, very horrible. She's then taken inside. She's given a kind of pudding bowl, so all her hair is chopped off, and then she is put into a rough grey Hessian dress and locked up. And amazingly, in 1787, so only a couple of years later, she escapes. And immediately it's assumed that this is all part of conspiracy, that the Queen wants her out of the way. And then there may be an element of the fact. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's possible. Who knows? Anyway, she gets to London. And when she's there, she writes this venomously slanderous attack on the Queen. She claims to have had a sapphic relationship with Marie Antoinette. She describes midnight assignations with the Queen. Heavens, I found her so beautiful. I said to myself, it is the goddess Flora toying with a humble little flower. So the idea of Marie Antoinette as predatory, as domineering.
Has groomed her.
Her, yes, exactly. And Chantal Thomas says of her, she was the Justine of the pre-revolutionary epic, and Justine is the heroine of the Marquis de Sade's most famous novel, and the Justine is impeccably virtuous, and because she is virtuous, she is persecuted by the kind of Sardian monsters, the aristocrats, and essentially this is, if she is the Justine, then Marie Antoinette is a kind of Sardian monster.
Yeah, Simon Sharma says she represented herself as an orphan of an older France, a heroine from the sticks, an innocent gone astray. That's the same point, isn't it? That they're corrupting. She's an innocent, rather like the Nicole, the person who she is actually corrupted, ironically. But in this case, she has been corrupted personally by Marie Antoinette. And of course, that may seem completely bonkers, because we know, as you discussed so brilliantly in the last episode, Tom, that Marie Antoinette is actually she's not puritanical, but she's very bourgeois in her...
No, I don't think she's bourgeois, but I think she's
her
a kind
sexual
of...
morality is bourgeois.
She's a combination. She's Catholic and she's Rousseauian,
Right.
She's a combination of kind of old school Catholic morality combined with a kind of girlish giddiness, a kind of love of the country,
fair enough,
flowers.
But what she isn't is she is not a predatory lesbian sort of groomer of little girls or young women or whatever that this woman is claiming.
But the problem is that these are portrayals of her that have already gained traction, that she's a monster of extravagance and that she's a kind of predatory whore. And the reason this scandal is so devastating is both that it amplifies those stories and that it makes them kind of very, very public. And so in the wake of it, you start to get the portrayal of her as a kind of monstrous nymphomaniac is completely turbocharged. So by 1789, and we all know what happens in 1789, a pamphlet is published which describes her sexual record: nobility, clergy, third estate. So that this is the backdrop to the meeting of the three estates, which we'll be doing in due course. So it's obviously inspired by it. Any man has a right to her favours. The most handsome and robust are the most welcome. Guards, lackeys, actors, height of opprobrium. Oh, indelible shame.
Yeah.
So kind of loving it. And it's not just the Queen who gets caught up on this, so also does her female favourite. So this is when the stories about the Duchesse de Polignac, who we talked about yesterday, one of her squad, they get vituperative as well. She's Duchesse de Polignac's relatively harmless, so is the Princesse de Lamballe, but they are both cast as kind of co-vampires in Marie Antoinette's nymphomaniac cover.
Queens of Vice, Tom.
Queens of Vice, absolutely. And what's fascinating is that in the wake of the punishment of de la Motte, you start to get fantasies in which Marie Antoinette and her favourites suffer similar punishments. So a lampoon is published against the Duchesse de Polignac, and it kind of says, let's see her humiliated. Let's see her punished. Let's see her suffer before the gaze of the people. Yes, madame, you must do penance. And as the choice is up to the confessor, here is the penance I impose in the name of the nation. Shave your head, don a grey Hessian dress as your only adornment, and go to the august assembly of the Estates General in this garb to make atonement and deliver up any remains of your plundering. So it's kind of working with, the punishments of convicted prostitutes.
And also the Austrianness is really important here, isn't it? Because there are two claims additional to this. One that's very common is that she actually, her first victim, as it were, or the first person who perhaps groomed her, was her own brother, the Austrian Emperor Joseph II.
Yeah.
And of course,
so to pursue the Mozart thing, he's the too many notes king.
Yeah,
in Amadeus.
yes, yeah. But then the other thing is, of course, that if she is Austrian, then she's not French, and she must therefore be a traitor. And the more that the international temperature kind of rises, especially once the revolution has got going, the more people say, she is not merely sexually kind of depraved, she's politically depraved, and she must be, in the course of her sapphic lusts, she is absorbing secrets, passing on secrets to France's enemies.
Yes, exactly so. And there's a sense that Maria Theresa, her mother, has sent her as a kind of to infect France with her villainy. So you may wonder, well, how on earth does Marie Antoinette cope with all this abuse? And the truth is that she treats it all with kind of amused disdain. So as early as 1775, she wrote to Maria Theresa, her mother, saying, "We're in the middle of a satirical song epidemic. They have made some up about everyone at court, men and women alike. French license is even extended to the king. I myself have not been spared. Although this country is fond enough of malice, the songs are so flat and in such bad taste that they are successful neither with the public nor high society."
So two things there. One, she's only 20 years old when she says that. So I always find the stuff about Marie Antoinette actually unbelievably repulsive. I mean, I just think
it's
how
awful.
anybody can I mean, how you can take the side of the pamphleteers and not of the girl stroke young woman at the centre of them is beyond me. But the other interesting thing is that she is quite wrong about that. So when she says successful neither with the public nor high society, she is dead wrong. They are enormously successful, and a lot of people, if you say it often enough, people will believe it.
Yeah, and so Chantal Thomas in her wonderful book about the pamphlets and Marie Antoinette's relationship to them, I mean, she basically says that one of the reasons perhaps why they don't impinge on Marie Antoinette is that she simply doesn't understand the power of the written word. That
she doesn't read.
Yeah, she doesn't really read, and she says Marie Antoinette had nothing to learn from the outside world. The hot-headed, vehement words of the pamphlets were incomprehensible to her, and so failed to touch her. But there are expressions of public hostility that do have an impact. So in May 1785, and this is when the scandal is kind of really building up, she goes into Paris, and the people there refuse to cheer her. And 2 years later, she's being booed and hissed on the streets of Paris.
Tom, you say that, but actually Theo, our producer, would tell you that she's not. People aren't booing and hissing; they are shouting out "ooh ooh" and "gee gee gee." That's their equivalent of hissing.
Yeah, that's French for boo.
Yeah,
exactly. And so one of the chiefs of police in Paris writes to the king at Versailles and says that the queen shouldn't go into the capital; it's unsafe for her. And so Louis XVI passes this on to his wife and forbids her to go to Paris. And, Marie Antoinette is deeply, deeply wounded by this. And so she cancels her public engagements in the capital, and she basically retreats to the Petit Trianon, which of course then only makes the stories because, what's she up to in there with all her, her girlfriends and terrible.
And the irony is, of course, she cannot win. That she's in a position now where whatever she does will be seen as evidence of guilt. So ironically, the fact that she tried to be less formal than the court is seen that she's not a good queen. The fact that she's got her group of friends, she's a lesbian. The fact that she's not going into the city because she's being booed, that shows she's arrogant and she doesn't care about people. And a traitor.
Yeah.
She cannot win. I feel really sorry for her.
And so you may wonder, well, does this matter? Does any of this matter? It does surface froth. It does matter because it doesn't just damage the queen. The whole scandal of the diamond necklace has also seriously, for the first time, damaged the public reputation of the king. Again, there have been kind of rumors bubbling under the surface, but again, it is this trial that brings slanders against the king to the surface. And there are two things that they focus. The first is that he is cast as a despot. He is the man who has sent all these people to the Bastille. He's a monster. He's an autocrat who doesn't respect the liberty of the people.
And as we'll see next time, that has enormous traction because of the political and financial crisis that France finds itself
absolutely. In. And the tragedy is that in a way, the king has kind of absorbed some of the lessons. So his treatment of Beaumarchais, who has written a preface to one of his plays that the king interprets as being an attack on him. He orders Beaumarchais to be arrested, but this time he doesn't send him to the Bastille. He sends him to a prison called the Saint-Lazare, which is a correction centre for delinquent boys. Where they're taught the error of their ways and kind of given the birch and things like that. And everyone finds this hilarious. And so Beaumarchais, who had always had laughter on his side, now finds that the laughter is against him. And basically his reputation is destroyed by it. So it suggests the king is kind of learning how to play the game.
The king, by the way, it's not a despot. I mean, that's one thing that's really worth stressing. If you think Louis XVI is a despotic monarch, I mean, there are many things that Louis XVI gets wrong, but being too bloodthirsty, too repressive is definitely, I don't think there's any historian who would think that was one of them.
Right. And if he'd wanted if he'd been a real despot, the Cardinal de Rohan would have vanished and wouldn't have been sitting in his chambers having kind of capons. But the other thing that this plays into is the idea of the king as sexually inadequate, and more specifically now a cuckold. Because if Marie Antoinette is cast as being this kind of voracious nymphomaniac, there is the sense that her powers are being drawn from the sexual inadequacies of the king, and so you get all these rhymes about the size and the
rigidity or otherwise,
the flaccidity of the royal member.
Yeah,
and in the kind of the account of the Queen and the affair that de la Motte writes in London, she says that the Cardinal and the Queen had been having an affair, and that they had been engaged in a conspiracy to make the Cardinal the Prime Minister of France and to subject France to the dominance of Austria. And so the king is somehow seen as being complicit in this. Yeah. And so the king and Queen of France, the emblems of the greatness of the country, are being cast as agents of an enemy power.
Well, Robert Darnton, in his book, The Revolutionary Temper, quotes a bookseller at the height of the diamond necklace affair, who wrote, I think, in his journal or to his brother, I can't remember which, but he wrote, "The public spirit has turned against him," the king, "because he inspires no respect, no fear, no confidence, and he throws away the public's money for all sorts of follies." And that is the lesson, that if you are a slightly gullible reader of these pamphlets and this sort of these propagandistic kind of pornographic fantasies, that's what you think about the king. That, as Darnton says, he's well-meaning but stupid, bewildered, incompetent, timid, indecisive, constantly drunk, unfit even to govern a German principality.
Yeah, absolutely. And Darnton is brilliant on why this matters, because essentially it's also going with the grain of the crisis that France itself is confronting. That this is a time where the state is running out of money and where people are starting to go hungry. There've been a succession of terrible harvests, and all this kind of stuff about diamond necklaces and cuckolding and cardinals and all kinds of stuff. It does actually matter, because it gives colour and venom to what otherwise might be kind of the sense of inchoate forces that are going wrong.
Yeah, absolutely it does.
And so I think important just to emphasize at this point, as we approach the fateful year 1789, that this is not about republicanism. Again, so much of this is coming from within the court. So it's coming from the Duc de Provence, the king's young brother. It's also coming from the Duke of Orleans, the Duc d'Orléans, who is the kind of after the three royal brothers, the most significant peer of the realm, who has a whole area of Paris that is his private, fiefdom.
Yeah, the Palais Royal.
And he's the Palais Royal. And so he's basically said anyone can publish what they like there. And so it's become a hotbed of all these kind of pamphlets and stuff. So there's that. So it absolutely doesn't imply republicanism. It's the signs of an immunity system going down. And it matters because basically the whole body politic seems diseased. And Dominic, I think in the next two episodes, we're going to explore exactly, beyond the flower gardens of Versailles, exactly how these diseases are kind of manifesting themselves out in Paris and in the countryside.
So we'll be back on Thursday, and we will be looking at the crisis that France finds itself in the 1780s, the crisis that leads to the calling of the States General and the beginning of the revolution. So there'll be a bit of finance, there'll be a lot of politics, there'll be a lot of famine, there'll be all of this kind